Welcome everyone, and thank you for being here today. I'm excited to introduce our topic. This is life too, and we need to talk about it. In this presentation, we'll explore the unfolding psychological crisis happening right now, the societal responses, or lack thereof, and what it means for women's mental health. We'll look at how perceptions and realities have shifted over the decades, and why this moment calls for honest conversation and awareness. Let's get started. We've all seen these viral videos before, right? A woman in a Starbucks, on a flight, in a retail store, or even in a neighborhood street having a complete public meltdown. You know the ones, screaming, crying, throwing things, even threatening others. And then, the moment someone tries to step in or offer help, she collapses into full-blown victimhood. It's almost like a performance, but it's happening in real life. This kind of scene has become so common that it feels almost normal. But what's really going on here? This is what I call the cultural meltdown everyone has seen, but no one truly discusses. These moments tell us something bigger about our societal dynamics, about boundaries, about expectations. And they connect directly to the overall theme of how we handle conflict, emotion, and accountability today. So, let's dig into why these public meltdowns are more than just viral videos. They're a reflection of deeper cultural shifts. When women have outbursts, the reactions tend to be softer, gentler, and often people just sidestep them altogether. Now, imagine for a moment if men were having similar public breakdowns at the same frequency. Society would likely demand federal investigations, emergency task forces, and a flurry of academic white papers almost overnight. This phenomenon, these emotional outbursts, are now recognizable and repeatable. In many cases, they're disruptive enough to shake up public spaces and even impact relationships. But surprisingly, despite how common and disruptive they can be, public concern remains quite muted. What we often see in these situations is an insistence on persecution, phrases like "you're hurting me," "I can't breathe," or "I'm just a girl." There's also this tendency to project blame onto bystanders, immediately turning the situation into a victimhood narrative. And once the victimhood is established, it can escalate quickly, leading to aggression or outbursts, emotional escalation, and sometimes even a full-blown meltdown. These incidents aren't random or isolated. They follow a pattern. In fact, the so-called Karen meltdown has become a cultural meme precisely because it follows a predictable series of stages. Recognizing this pattern helps us understand how these outbursts operate and why they tend to escalate in similar ways each time. And that should concern everyone. Whether you agree with this critique or not, the statistics are clear. Women have become less happy, not more, under this new paradigm. What we're seeing is a shift where subjective emotional experience is elevated above objective reality. This means that feelings often take precedence over facts, which can distort our understanding of reality. At the same time, there's been a push to promote emotional expression without holding people accountable for how their actions impact others. This can lead to a lack of personal responsibility. Additionally, masculine traits, like assertiveness or independence, are increasingly being pathologized as toxic, which can discourage men from embracing qualities that are essential for healthy relationships and society. We've also seen a discouragement of traditional family structures, which historically provided stability and purpose. Instead, there's an encouragement for women to adopt roles traditionally seen as masculine, like prioritizing career over family, which can further complicate emotional well-being. Modern feminism, in its earlier days, was about equal rights, simple and straightforward. But today, many argue it has shifted into something more ideological, focusing less on equality and more on cultural reconstruction. This involves revering gender hierarchies and rejecting traditional relational models that have supported society for generations. So this raises an important and controversial question. Has feminism played a role in this emotional decline? It's a question worth exploring because understanding the influence of these cultural shifts is crucial to seeing how they impact our collective happiness and stability. Now, increasingly, we see these behaviors showing up in our everyday interactions. They might be scaled-down versions, but they can still be quite disruptive. For example, public meltdowns that are caught on video, or the rise of online identity politics where people fiercely defend or attack certain personas. We see these dynamics playing out in university discourse, activist movements, dating scenes, and social media culture. What's important to realize is that these behaviors, which used to be confined mainly to clinical settings or therapy rooms, are now appearing more openly in the mainstream. They often manifest as low empathy under stress, manipulative tactics, victim mentality after experiencing aggression, impulsivity, and a lack of accountability. You'll also notice traits like narcissistic entitlement, what some call main character syndrome, and emotional dysregulation. These are hallmarks of what we call cluster B personality disorders, which include borderline, narcissistic, histrionic, and antisocial patterns. While these aren't exclusive to women, they tend to be more prevalent or at least more visible in female populations. So, understanding these traits, especially emotional dysregulation, is crucial because it's become so common in mainstream interactions today. It ties into the broader theme of how personality and emotional regulation influence behavior in our digital age and social environments. Let's take a closer look at how the field is evolving in its approach. Instead of directly addressing cluster B traits, many institutions have started renaming these as complex PTSD. This shift emphasizes victimhood rather than responsibility, and while trauma is undeniably real, broadening the diagnostic criteria to include up to 70% of the population as traumatized can actually dilute the meaning of the diagnosis. It risks obscuring what genuine pathology looks like. Now, moving on to the demographics within the mental health profession, about 80 to 90% of therapists today are women. Interestingly, a significant subset of these practitioners display some of the traits they're supposed to diagnose. When therapists see these patterns in themselves, they are often less likely to view them as pathological, which adds a layer of complexity to diagnosis and treatment. This brings us to another key point: ideological pressure. Many clinicians fear being labeled sexist or anti-woman if they diagnose disorders that carry stigma, especially with women. This fear can influence their clinical judgments and lead to reluctance in diagnosing clear cases of cluster B disorders in women, even when symptoms are quite evident. All of these factors, rebranding, demographics, and ideological concerns, contribute to why the mental health field is struggling to maintain objectivity and clarity in diagnosis. It's a complex web that impacts how we understand and treat these conditions. This correlation is something we see quite often in clinical circles, even if it's not something that's openly discussed very much. What's important to understand is that the issue isn't just about a small tattoo or a symbolic piece. It's more about those full-sleeve, neck-to-ankle, hyper-stylized tattoos that often carry a deeper meaning. These kinds of tattoos tend to be associated with emotional dysregulation, which is a core concept in understanding certain behaviors and mental health struggles. For many individuals, tattoos can serve as socially acceptable forms of long-term self-harm. Think of it like a permanent version of cutting, where the body becomes a canvas for expressing inner pain or turmoil. It's a way some people symbolize their struggles, and perhaps their attempts to control or cope with intense emotions. When we look at the symbolism behind self-harm, it often relates to identity diffusion, trauma history, impulsivity, and emotional instability. These tattoos can sometimes reflect these underlying issues. Research increasingly points to a link between extensive tattoos and body modifications and certain psychological patterns. These modifications might be more than just aesthetic choices. They can be intertwined with a person's emotional state and their way of handling distress. So, understanding these connections helps us see how tattoos and body art can sometimes be more than just personal style. They can be expressions of deeper psychological experiences. The result of these dynamics is what I would call a cultural emotional crisis, and it's not just about individuals, it's about our entire society. Women with high cluster B traits, for example, often raise children, both boys and girls, who then internalize these patterns as normal. And what happens next? These behaviors tend to replicate across generations. The emotional volatility we see intensifies, and each new generation becomes more reactive, more fragile, and increasingly confused about their own identities. This process is known as generational transmission, where dysfunctional behaviors are modeled as normal. When our society starts prioritizing emotional comfort over clinical truth, untreated psychological issues become even more prevalent. Emotional narratives come to dominate policy discussions, and the focus shifts away from objective standards. Accountability starts to erode, diagnostic criteria become blurred, and the research itself can become politicized. This shift has serious consequences. Instead of asking, "What does the data show?" we begin to ask, "How will this make people feel?" which distorts our understanding of reality. And as women increasingly lead fields like psychology, academia, gender studies, and social work, we're seeing a new problem emerge: emotion-centered decision-making replacing objective analysis. This creates what I'd call a societal blind spot, that women often become the emotional standard-bearers, shaping norms and expectations that are driven more by feelings than by facts. And that, in turn, impacts how we understand and address the challenges we face as a society. This slide is about shifting the perspective from blaming women to understanding how we can support them and society as a whole. It's not about attacking women. It's about helping them and stabilizing society before emotional dysfunction becomes the cultural norm. We need to stop treating emotional chaos as a form of empowerment because it ultimately undermines genuine well-being. Men, for example, must recognize red flags and protect themselves, and mental health professionals should return to objective diagnostic standards instead of trends that may overlook underlying issues. Modern feminism, perhaps unintentionally, has sometimes fueled emotional instability instead of alleviating it. But it's important to acknowledge that many women are genuinely struggling, and the rise in traits associated with cluster B personality disorders, like narcissism, borderline traits, or histrionic tendencies, is real. Yet, not all women are facing these challenges. Before we can address any problems effectively, we first need to acknowledge them. So, the key question here is, where do we go from here? Because, honestly, this situation is a cultural tragedy masked as empowerment. Despite the messaging we often hear, women are encouraged to pursue paths that actually correlate with lower happiness, like career-driven lifestyles without support systems, while the paths linked to higher happiness, such as family and community, are painted as oppressive. For example, only about 11% of single, childless women report feeling very happy, compared to 40% of married women with children. Large-scale surveys, including the American Family Survey, reveal a paradox. Modern feminism, which aims to empower women, may actually be making them less happy overall. So, understanding this paradox helps us grasp why addressing these issues is so crucial for both individuals and society. Life, too, has begun, and the direction we take will determine whether it turns into a renaissance or a breakdown. It all depends on whether we're finally willing to face what's really happening around us. If we truly care about women, men, families, and the future, we can't ignore the psychological trends unfolding right in front of us. And we definitely can't afford to rebuild a healthy society on a foundation of emotional chaos. Supporting women towards emotional health means focusing on real solutions, not ideological radicalization. We need to re-embrace complementary gender roles, recognizing the unique strengths and contributions of each gender. Cultural recalibration is essential, shifting our mindset to healthier, more balanced perspectives. Setting clear boundaries is also critical, because without them, chaos and misunderstanding thrive. We need honest diagnosis, acknowledging problems openly and without denial, so we can address them effectively. And the key to moving forward is simple. The solution is not to shame, blame, or ridicule. Instead, we must understand that we're living in a time where emotional dysregulation is incentivized, victimhood is often glorified, and accountability is minimized. This creates predictable outcomes: declining happiness, destabilized relationships, broken families, and a generation that struggles to regulate their emotions. So my final thoughts are this. If we want a better future, we must face these psychological trends head-on and choose to build on understanding, responsibility, and emotional health. That's how we can truly start a new chapter, one rooted in strength, resilience, and genuine connection.